Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. David Cruz stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. 6 years of marriage had taught him the exact, not Josephine preferred Windsor, tight against the collar, with the point perfectly centered. Not that she would notice the effort, but habits were hard to break. "Joe," he called out, his voice echoing through their modernist Asheville home. "We should leave in 20 minutes to beat traffic." No response came from the master bedroom. David sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, slightly graying at the temples despite being only 36. The lines around his eyes had deepened over the years, not from laughter as much as from quiet calculation. He remembered the day they met, for years before they married. The tech convention in Raleigh had been packed with the usual suspects. Startups hungry for funding, established companies showcasing new security solutions, and networkers collecting business cards like baseball cards. David had been giving a presentation on emerging cybersecurity threats when he spotted her in the third row, Josephine Larkspur. Even the memory made his chest tighten. She'd approached him after his talk, champagne flute in hand, eyes bright with interest that seemed genuine. "That was impressive," she'd said. "You made digital security sound almost sexy." Her laugh had been infectious then, her ambition admirable. She ran a growing lifestyle blog, she explained, and wanted to understand digital security better. Their conversation flowed from encryption to favorite hiking trails, from password protocols to preferred wines. By evening, they were sharing dinner at a small Italian place downtown. "You're not what I expected from a cybersecurity consultant," she told him. "Most tech guys I meet can't maintain eye contact for more than 3 seconds. Most tech guys haven't had to learn people the way I have," he'd replied. Growing up with just his mother in rural North Carolina, watching her struggle while working 2 jobs, it taught you to read rooms quickly, to understand intentions. Technology is predictable. People are the real puzzles. David splashed cold water on his face, bringing himself back to the present. Those early days seemed like a different lifetime. "Joe, seriously, we need to. I heard you the first time." Josephine appeared in the bathroom doorway, scrolling through her phone. At 32, she was stunning, honey blonde hair falling in perfect waves, makeup applied with professional skill, her figure maintained through rigorous workouts and carefully monitored diets. "I've been ready. I was answering comments on my latest post." David nodded, studying his wife. Somewhere between dating and marriage, something had shifted. The woman who once asked insightful questions about his work now barely acknowledged it except to mention what his income could provide. The passionate conversations had devolved into her monologues about social media metrics and influencer collaborations. "The post about Taryn's pre-wedding brunch?" he asked, making an effort. Josephine finally looked up from her phone. "Yes, 15,000 likes already. The sponsored content for the venue is performing exceptionally well." She turned away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. "Let's go." "You're driving." In the garage, David opened the door of their luxury SUV, for her another habit Josephine no longer seemed to notice. As he slid behind the wheel, he recalled what had seemed like shared values once. They'd both come from humble beginnings, him from truly modest means, her from what she described as struggling middle class, though he'd later learn that her father was merely a mid-level banker rather than an executive. They'd talked about building something authentic together, about substance over style. Now he drove them through the winding mountain roads of Asheville in a vehicle he didn't particularly care for, toward a dinner with friends she'd selected for their social media potential rather than any genuine connection. "Remember, the Clarksons are heavily invested in that new downtown development," Josephine said, not looking up from her phone. "Marcus has connections to at least 3 potential sponsors I've been courting. Try to seem interested when he talks about golf." David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Marcus talked about nothing but golf. Then it shouldn't be hard to fake interest." She finally glanced at him, her expression softening fractionally. "This dinner could really boost my summer campaign metrics. Just help me out, please." And there was the glimpse of the woman he'd fallen for. just enough to keep him going, to keep him playing his part in what increasingly felt like a performance rather than a partnership. "I'll be charming," he promised, his voice neutral. Josephine reached over and briefly squeezed his arm. "That's why I married you. You always come through when it counts." David kept his eyes on the road, his face a mask of calm agreement. But internally, a different voice spoke, one that had grown progressively louder in recent months. "That's not why you married me. You married me because I'm stable, successful, and stupid enough to fund whatever life you're trying to project to the world." But he said nothing. Instead, he drove on as the mountains of western North Carolina surrounded them, beautiful and unchanging, while inside the car, unseen cracks continued to spread through the foundation of their marriage. 3 weeks before Taryn's wedding, David sat in his home office, fingers moving with focused intensity across his keyboard. The soft blue light of multiple monitors illuminated his face as he put the finishing touches on a digital photo album he'd coded himself. It wasn't just a slideshow. He'd created an interactive experience that told the story of Taryn and Beau's relationship through photos, music, and animation that had taken him nearly 2 weeks of late nights. Josephine had barely noticed his absence from their bed. A series of heavy knocks interrupted his concentration. "It's open," David called, saving his progress. Harlan Vick filled the doorway like a storm cloud, 6'3", broad-shouldered, with a beard that would make a lumberjack envious. His motorcycle jacket was worn at the elbows, and the faint scent of motor oil followed him everywhere. "Working late again, computer man?" Harlan asked, dropping into the leather chair across from David's desk. Despite his rough appearance, his voice was surprisingly gentle, a remnant of his years counseling fellow veterans with PTSD. David leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Just finishing Taryn's wedding gift." "Ah, the sister-in-law who called you aggressively average at your own wedding reception?" Harlan shook his head. "You're too good for these people, Dave." "It's not for her," David replied. "It's for Joe." Harlan's expression darkened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flask, offering it to David first. When David declined with a small shake of his head, Harlan took a quick swig. "How'd the Charlotte trip go?" Harlan asked. "The one where your wife wouldn't let you come?" "It wasn't that she wouldn't let me," David corrected, though his tone lacked conviction. "It was sister stuff, wedding planning, and you paid for it. It wasn't a question." David didn't bother denying it. "She's with her sister. It makes her happy, does it?" Harlan leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, nothing makes that woman happy for longer than it takes to post about it online." David turned his attention to the screens, pulling up photos from Josephine's Instagram. There she was in Charlotte with Taryn, both women smiling broadly at a wedding boutique, at a cake tasting, at a venue walkthrough. In each image, Josephine looked radiant, tagging expensive brands and adding captions about sister love and creating perfect memories. What the photos didn't show was what David had accidentally overheard during a video call Josephine had forgotten to end properly the previous night. "God, David is spending a fortune on this slideshow thing for you," Josephine had told Taryn, her voice thick with wine and disdain. "As if anyone wants to see his coding skills. It's so him, practical to a fault." Taryn's giggle had carried clearly. "At least he's useful. Beau can barely operate Netflix." "Useful, sure. Like a good vacuum cleaner." Josephine's voice had dropped. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Paxton and I had stayed together." David had disconnected the call then, his face expressionless. He hadn't mentioned it to Josephine. He'd simply continued working on the slideshow. "You know, don't you?" Harlan's voice pulled him back to the present. "You know she's using you." David met his friend's concerned gaze steadily. A smile, small but genuine, crossed his face. "I know." Harlan studied him for a long moment. "There's something different about you lately. Calmer. Like you've made a decision." Instead of answering directly, David turned back to his computer, clicking through to a folder marked contingencies. He didn't open it, but its presence seemed to satisfy Harlan. "You always were the strategic type," Harlan said, nodding slowly. "Just remember I've got your back, whatever play you're making." "I know that too," David replied. He closed the folder and returned to the slideshow. "How about a preview of Taryn and Beau's greatest hits?" But as he clicked through the romantic images, his mind was elsewhere on another folder, one with a different name, containing information that had taken months to compile. Information that would change everything. Meanwhile, in Charlotte, Josephine sat at the marble-topped island in her parents' kitchen, scrolling through her phone. Across from her, Taryn was arranging place cards for the rehearsal dinner, her engagement ring catching the light every time she moved. "Did you see the numbers on my latest post?" Josephine asked without looking up. "The one with us at the flower tasting? Almost 20,000 likes." Taryn mumbled, distracted. At 28, she was the softer version of Josephine, same honey blonde hair, but with gentler features, same ambition, but with less edge. "That's great, Joe." "It is great," their mother Whitney said as she swept into the kitchen. At 58, Whitney Larkspur maintained the appearance of a woman 10 years younger through a combination of rigorous self-care and strategic cosmetic procedures. "Your following will be such an asset once you start your own brand line." Josephine smiled tightly. "That's the plan." David's connections in the tech industry might finally be useful for something other than boring dinner conversation. "How is the quiet man?" Whitney asked, pouring herself a glass of white wine. "Still quiet." "Still David." Josephine shrugged. "Working all the time. Saving money like we might hit another Great Depression." "Well, his financial sense is nothing to complain about." Whitney noted, her tone measured. "Your father appreciates a man who understands the value of a dollar." "Dad appreciates anyone who picks up the check," Taryn muttered, earning a sharp look from their mother. "Your father built everything we have from scratch," Whitney said, the familiar defense automatic. "He's allowed to expect certain standards." As if summoned, Nash Larkspur appeared in the doorway tall, imposing despite being in his early 60s, with a golfer's tan and a permanent expression of mild disappointment. "Are we talking about me?" he asked, not particularly interested in the answer. "Josephine, your husband sent over the payment for the welcome dinner. Quite generous." There was a question in his tone, though not asked directly. "David's doing well," Josephine replied smoothly. "The consulting firm landed 2 major contracts last quarter." Nash nodded, satisfied. "Good. Though I still don't understand why he couldn't come down for this planning weekend." Bo made the time. "David's working on a special project," Josephine said, the lie coming easily. She'd told David the weekend was just for the bridal party, though in reality, she simply hadn't wanted him there, dampening her shine with his sensible comments and thoughtful questions. "Actually, he's creating some kind of digital album for Taryn and Bo." "How thoughtful," Whitney said, but her eyes had already moved on to the place cards. "Taryn, you haven't seated the Montgomerys next to the Wilsons, have you? After that charity auction debacle." As the conversation shifted to seating arrangements and social politics, Josephine returned to her phone, pulling up the private message thread she'd been maintaining with Paxton Rudd for the past 3 months. Her first serious boyfriend, now a successful real estate developer. Married with 2 children, but unhappy, or so he claimed. "Meeting still on for tomorrow?" She typed, then deleted it. "Too eager, I in town for one more day if you're free," she wrote instead. "Better. Casual." His response came almost immediately. "Noon. The usual place." Josephine smiled to herself, aware of a familiar thrill that had nothing to do with social media metrics or wedding plans. She looked up to find her father watching her, his expression unreadable. "Everything all right, Josephine?" he asked. "Perfect," she replied, locking her phone. "Just perfect." The rehearsal dinner was held, an upscale farm-to-table restaurant in Asheville, its rustic chic aesthetic providing the perfect backdrop for Josephine's carefully curated Instagram stories. David watched her work the room, her laugh musical as she moved from group to group, her champagne glass never quite emptied. He sat with Harlan at a corner table, nursing a whiskey he had barely touched. From this vantage point, he could observe the entire Larkspur family in their element. "The father looks like he's been sucking lemons all night," Harlan commented, following David's gaze to where Nash Larkspur was deep in conversation with the father of the groom. "Nash always looks like that," David replied. "It's his default expression when he's not golfing or criticizing someone." Taryn approached their table, her face flushed with excitement and champagne. Unlike her sister, Taryn had always been kind to David, if somewhat dismissive. "David, the slideshow is tomorrow, right?" During the reception, he nodded. "All set up. The venue manager and I tested it this afternoon." "You're the best," she said, squeezing his shoulder. Both so excited. His family never takes photos, so having our whole relationship documented like this, it means a lot. For a moment, David felt a pang of guilt about what he was planning. Taryn wasn't the target. But before he could dwell on it, Josephine appeared beside her sister, sliding a proprietary arm around her waist. "Is my husband boring you with tech talk?" she asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. "He was telling me about the slideshow," Taryn replied. "Ah, yes. The famous slideshow." Josephine's tone turned the gesture into something quaint and slightly embarrassing. "David likes his little projects." David met her gaze steadily. "Not so little. 6 years of your sister's relationship condensed into 12 minutes of memories." "Well, aren't you clever?" Josephine said, but her attention was already wandering. She gestured to a server. "We need more champagne at the head table." As the server nodded and left, David reached for the wine bottle on their table. "I can pour you some while you wait, Joe." What happened next occurred so quickly that several guests didn't notice it at all. As David raised the bottle toward Josephine's glass, she slapped his hand away, hard enough that the bottle almost slipped from his grasp. "Don't embarrass me," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "You're just a walking ATM." The table fell silent. Taryn's eyes widened in shock. Harlan straightened in his chair, his expression darkening. Bo, who had just walked up to join them, froze mid-step. David stared at his wife, the bottle still in his hand, his expression carefully neutral despite the moisture that briefly appeared in his eyes. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. "Of course," he said quietly. "How thoughtless of me." He placed the bottle down and stood. "If you'll excuse me." As he walked away, he heard Terrence whispered, "Joe, what the hell?" "Oh, he's fine." Josephine's dismissive response carried across the room. David doesn't have feelings like normal people. In the restroom, David stood before the mirror, his hands braced on the sink. The man who looked back at him was calm, composed, someone who had made a decision and found peace in it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opening a document titled Wedding Speech Draft 4. With a few quick taps, he deleted the entire text and began typing again. "My dear friends and family." When he emerged 15 minutes later, his expression was serene. Harlan met him at the bar, concern evident in his weathered face. "You okay, brother?" David accepted the fresh whiskey Harlan handed him. "I am now." That was out of line, even for her. It was, David agreed, taking a small sip. But it was also necessary. "Necessary?" Harlan echoed. Confused, David watched as Josephine held court at the head table, her arm around Taryn. Both of them now posed for a photo that Whitney was taking. Nash stood behind them, his hand possessively on Whitney's shoulder, the picture of familial pride. "Sometimes you need absolute clarity before you act," David said quietly. "She just gave me that." Harlan studied his friend, understanding slowly dawning. "The wedding's tomorrow." "Yes," David replied, "and I have a speech to give." The morning of Taryn's wedding broke clear and perfect over the mountains, as if nature itself had aligned with the Larkspur family's expectations. David stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury cabin they'd rented near the venue, watching the early light turn the mist golden as it rose from the valley. His phone buzzed with a text from Harlan. "Still on?" David typed back a simple yes. Then he set the phone down and picked up his coffee, mentally reviewing the steps of what would happen today. The weight of the flash drive in his pocket felt significant, though it was physically negligible. Everything he needed was on it, evidence compiled over months, audio files, screenshots, financial records. Today would end his marriage. But it would also end the charade. Josephine emerged from the bedroom, already in full makeup, though the ceremony was hours away. She wore a silk robe emblazoned with Sister of the Bride. Across the back, a matching set with Taryn's bride robe, both gift from David, though Josephine had taken credit for them on social media. "You're up early," she noted, moving to the coffee machine. "Big day," David replied, his tone neutral. "Wanted to make sure everything's ready." Josephine glanced at him, something like suspicion flickering across her features. "You seem different today." "Do I?" "Yes." She studied him more carefully, almost excited. David allowed himself a small smile. "It's not every day your sister-in-law gets married." Josephine wasn't convinced, but her phone chimed with a notification that instantly captured her attention. "The makeup artist is running 15 minutes late. Taryn's going to have a meltdown." "I'm sure you'll handle it," David said, moving toward the door. "I need to head over early to set up the slideshow and check on a few things." "Don't forget your speech," Josephine called after him. Not looking up from her phone, David patted his jacket pocket where a folded paper rested beside the flash drive. Wouldn't dream of it. The wedding venue was spectacular, a renovated barn-style resort nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, with expansive views and rustic luxe accommodations that perfectly matched the aesthetic Taryn had envisioned. By the time Josephine arrived with the bridal party, David had already ensured the presentation system was working flawlessly and had made subtle adjustments to the dinner seating that would serve his purposes later. "David, my man." Bo Ronson approached, his face flushed with pre-wedding excitement. At 30, Bo was good-natured and straightforward, a commercial real estate developer who had always treated David with genuine respect. "The venue tech guy says you've got some amazing slideshow planned." "I hope it meets expectations," David replied, shaking Bo's hand firmly. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Bo admitted with a laugh. "Not about marrying Taryn, that's the only thing I'm sure of. It's just, her family can be intense." David supplied. "That's diplomatic of you." Bo glanced over to where Nash Larkspur was inspecting the floral arrangements with a critical eye. "Her dad asked me about my 5-year portfolio projections this morning." At 7 a.m., David chuckled, genuine fondness for Bo evident. "Just remember, you're marrying Taryn, not her family." Bo's expression turned sympathetic. "You got the whole package, huh?" Before David could respond, Pastor Clem Hightower ambled over, his lanky frame and salt and pepper beard giving him the appearance of a frontier preacher despite his decidedly progressive theology. "Gentlemen," he greeted them, his deep voice carrying a hint of the Blue Ridge in its cadence. "Ready to witness the joining of two souls in holy matrimony and the joining of two families in unholy anxiety." Bo laughed nervously while David smiled appreciatively at the pastor's dry humor. "The bride's mother has already informed me that my homily should be meaningful but brief, preferably under 4 minutes," Pastor Clem continued, eyes twinkling. "Apparently, the cocktail hour timing is more sacred than the ceremony." "That sounds like Whitney," David agreed. "And how are you doing, David?" Pastor Clem asked, his perceptive gaze settling on him. "You seem centered today." "I'm at peace," David replied simply. Something in his tone made both men look at him more closely, but before they could inquire further, Whitney Larkspur's voice rang out across the venue, calling for Bo. "Duty calls," Bo sighed, straightening his tie. "See you on the other side." As Bo hurried away, Pastor Clem lingered, studying David with the experienced eye of someone accustomed to reading between lines. "Peace is a good thing," he said carefully, "though it comes in many forms." "Yes," David agreed. "Sometimes it comes after the storm." Pastor Clem nodded slowly. "Just remember that innocent bystanders can get caught in bad weather." With that cryptic advice, he moved away to prepare for the ceremony, leaving David to consider his words. But David's resolve remained unshaken. He had planned too carefully, waited too long. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The ceremony itself was beautiful, with Taryn radiant in her gown and Bo fighting back tears as she walked down the aisle. David stood dutifully beside Josephine in the front row, her hand tucked properly into the crook of his arm for the photos she made sure were being taken to any observer. They looked like the perfect couple, him handsome in his custom navy suit, her stunning in a pale blue dress that complemented her eyes and skin tone flawlessly. But David felt nothing when she squeezed his arm during the vows, nothing when she wiped away a performative tear as Taryn and Bo were pronounced husband and wife. During the cocktail hour, David circulated among the guests, playing his role with precision. He chatted with Bo's parents, complimented Whitney on the floral arrangement she'd selected, and even managed a civil conversation with Nash about the current market outlook. Across the room, he spotted a familiar face, Greer Wilson, one of Josephine's college friends who had maintained a distance from her after the wedding. Greer had been the only one to quietly ask David if he was truly happy during their rehearsal dinner 4 years ago. He had lied then. Today, he would not have to. When Greer caught his eye, he nodded slightly to her. She returned the gesture, curiosity evident in her expression. Finally, it was time for the reception dinner. As the wedding party was announced and entered the main barn, transformed now into an elegant dining space, David took his seat at the head table. Josephine was busy instructing the photographer about certain shots she wanted, barely acknowledging him as he held out her chair. "The centerpieces are all wrong," she muttered as she sat. "I specifically told Whitney that the roses should be blush, not pink." "Tragedy," David murmured, earning a sharp look from his wife. "Don't start," she warned. "This needs to be perfect for my social coverage." Throughout the meal, Josephine continued her subtle undermining, correcting his table manners when he reached for the wrong fork, sighing dramatically when he engaged Beau's uncle in conversation about cybersecurity, making a show of taking his barely touched wine glass and placing it further from his reach. "You've had enough," she said quietly, though he'd had only a few sips. "Remember what happened last Christmas?" Nothing had happened last Christmas. It was a fiction she had created and referenced occasionally to control him in social situations. But David simply nodded, his eyes meeting Harlan's across the room. His friend raised his water glass in a subtle toast, confirmation that everything was in place. As the main course was cleared, the DJ announced it was time for speeches. Taryn's maid of honor went first, delivering a tearful tribute to their friendship. Beau's best man followed with an amusing anecdote about their college days. Then Nash surprised everyone with a brief but emotional acknowledgement of his younger daughter's happiness. And now, the DJ announced David Cruz, brother-in-law of the bride, would like to say a few words. A polite ripple of applause spread through the room as David rose, buttoning his jacket. Josephine didn't look up from her phone, apparently uninterested in whatever generic well wishes her husband might offer. David moved to the small podium set up near the head table, placing his folded speech on its surface but not opening it. Instead, he surveyed the room, taking in the expectant faces, the soft lighting, the perfect table settings. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice clear and steady. "It's a privilege to witness Taryn and Beau's special day, and to be part of such a close-knit family." Standard opening. People smiled, relaxed. "I'd like to thank both families for coming together today. The Ronsons, who have welcomed Taryn with open arms." He nodded toward Beau's parents. "And the Larkspurs, who have been so instructive about what family means." A subtle shift in tone. Nash straightened slightly. Whitney's smile became fixed. "It's traditional at weddings to offer advice to the newlyweds. But today, I find myself reflecting more on what marriage has taught me personally." He paused, taking a sip of water. In the silence, Josephine finally looked up from her phone, a frown beginning to form. "Last night, at the rehearsal dinner, my wife called me a walking ATM." David continued, his voice still pleasant. "She slapped my hand away when I tried to pour her wine, afraid I might embarrass her. I smiled through it, but I'm done smiling." Gasps rippled through the audience. Josephine froze, her phone forgotten. "Marriage, I've learned, should be a partnership built on respect, honesty, and shared values. When those elements are missing, what remains is a transaction, a performance stage for the benefit of others." David reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive, holding it up so it caught the light. "I had hoped, when I paid for 82% of this wedding, including Josephine's gown, her parents' accommodations, and Taryn's bridal shower, that I was supporting my family. Instead, I was funding a facade." Whitney stood, her face pale. "David, that's enough. You're making a scene." "Am I?" He turned to face her directly. "Or am I finally acknowledging the scene that's been playing out for years?" He plugged the flash drive into the laptop connected to the venue's projection system. The screens around the room, which had been displaying tasteful photos of Taryn and Beau, now showed an image of a text conversation. 3 months ago, I discovered that my wife had a burner phone and a secret credit card she used to meet a man named Paxton Rudd, her ex-boyfriend, now married with 2 children. Josephine stood now, fury and fear battling on her face. "You had no right," she shouted. "You invaded my privacy." Privacy? David's laugh was hollow. "Is that what we're calling adultery now?" Nash was on his feet too, his face mottled with rage. "You stop this right now, boy." "I'm not a boy, Nash. And I'm not an ATM either." David clicked to the next screen, an audio waveform. "I'm a cybersecurity expert who finally decided to secure his own life." He pressed play. Josephine's voice filled the room, slightly tinny but unmistakable. David doesn't have a clue. He's so busy providing the lifestyle that he doesn't see what's happening right in front of him. "I'm a champagne wife to a basic man. But at least he pays the bills." Another voicemail, smug. "Does he suspect anything?" Josephine again. "David, please." He sees what he wants to see. He's convenient, and his credit limit is impressive. David stopped the recording as murmurs spread through the stunned crowd. Taryn had both hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Bo had an arm around her, his expression grim. "I could play more," David said, his voice now quiet but audible in the shocked silence. "There's quite a collection. But this day isn't really about revenge. It's about truth." The room had fallen into complete silence, the kind that feels physical in its weight. David stood calmly at the podium, watching as the implications of what he'd revealed rippled through the wedding party and guests. Josephine remained frozen, her face drained of color except for 2 spots of angry red high on her cheekbones. Whitney had sunk back in her chair, one hand pressed to her throat. Nash looked like he might have a stroke, his complexion now alarmingly purple. "This isn't appropriate," Nash finally sputtered, finding his voice. "This is Taryn's day, for God's sake." David nodded, turning toward Taryn and Bo. "You're right, and I genuinely apologize to both of you for this disruption. But some truths won't wait for convenient timing." He unplugged the flash drive and pocketed it. "Taryn, Bo, I wish you every happiness. I believe in what you have. It's real, and it's worth protecting." Taryn was still crying, but she nodded slightly, her gaze shifting between David and her sister with confusion and hurt. David continued, his voice softer now. "And here's one more truth. I paid for all this because I believed in love. That was my mistake. Now I believe in myself." He reached into his jacket's inner pocket and pulled out an envelope. "The honeymoon fund that Josephine and I were gifting you, $40,000 has been divided. Half remains yours, as planned. The other half I've donated this morning to the Women's Shelter of Charlotte, in honor of authentic partnerships based on mutual respect." Josephine let out a strangled sound, something between a gasp and a shriek. "You had no right. That was our money." "It was my money," David corrected gently. "Earned through work you regularly mocked as boring and beneath you. But now it's funding something meaningful." Harlan stood now, moving to position himself near David, his presence solid and reassuring. "As for us," David said, turning back to Josephine, "I think we both know what happens next." He walked over to where she stood and placed the envelope on the table in front of her. "Divorce papers. Already filed with the court. Your lawyer will be contacted Monday morning." For a moment, Josephine stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. Then, with a sudden surge of rage, she lunged toward David, fingers curled like claws. "You ruined everything," she screamed. Harlan stepped smoothly between them, catching Josephine's wrist with gentle but firm hands. "Easy now," he said quietly. "Don't make this worse than it is." From across the room, a slow, deliberate clapping began. David turned to see Greer standing, her face alight with something like vindication. "About time someone told the truth around here." She called out at a few other guests. Those who had witnessed Josephine's behavior over the years joined the applause, though most remained in stunned silence. David nodded to Greer in acknowledgement, then turned back to the wedding party. "Congratulations again, Taryn and Bo. I wish you nothing but happiness." He paused, then added with quiet sincerity, "Love should be the foundation, not the facade." With that, He turned and walked steadily through the shocked crowd, Harlan falling in a step beside him. At the door, he paused, looking back at the scene. Josephine now collapsed in a chair, sobbing dramatically. Whitney attempting to comfort her while shooting venomous looks his way. Nash on his phone, likely calling his lawyer. Taryn and Bo huddled together, speaking intensely. The truth had cost them all something today. But for David, it had finally purchased freedom. Outside, the mountain air felt clean and cool against his face. The sun was setting, painting the ridges in shades of gold and purple. That, Harlan said as they walked toward their motorcycles, was something to witness. Was it too much? David asked, suddenly uncertain. Taryn didn't deserve to have her day disrupted. Probably, Harlan admitted, but some bandages need to be ripped off quick. He clapped a hand on David's shoulder. Where to now, brother? David looked out at the mountains, feeling truly unburdened for the first time in years. Home. I've got a house to reclaim. As they mounted their bikes and roared away from the venue, David didn't look back. The chapter was closed, and while the pain was real, he had loved Josephine once. After all, so was the relief. The road ahead curved through forests and along ridges, demanding his full attention. David leaned into it, embracing both the risk and the possibility. No longer anyone's ATM, no longer anyone's convenient husband, just himself. Finally, the news spread faster than David had anticipated. By the time he returned to his house that evening, 3 different neighbors had texted to check if he was okay, having heard garbled versions of what had happened at the wedding that he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked through the modern, open-plan home that had always felt more like a stage photo shoot than a lived-in space. Josephine's influence was everywhere in the precisely arranged throw pillows, the strategic placement of design books, the curated family photos that told a story of perfect happiness. David went to the kitchen and opened a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving not for a special occasion, but for this specific one. He poured 2 fingers into a crystal tumbler and carried it to the back deck that overlooked the wooded lot behind their property. Sitting in the gathering darkness, he raised his glass to the stars now appearing overhead. To truth, he murmured. However messy, his phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, but he ignored them all except for a text from Harlan. Need company? Not tonight, David replied. Need the quiet. Thanks, brother. It wasn't that he regretted his actions. He had been meticulously planning this for months, ever since he'd first discovered Josephine's deception. But the reality of it, the finality, settled over him with a weight he hadn't fully anticipated. 6 years of his life. Gone. Not wasted. Exactly, he had learned critical lessons about himself, about what he would and wouldn't tolerate. But still, years that could have been spent building something real, something lasting. The sound of a car pulling into his driveway roused him from his thoughts. David tensed, expecting Josephine, ready for the confrontation that would surely come. But when the car door slammed, the footsteps that approached were heavier, more deliberate. Nash Larkspur appeared around the side of the house, his expression grim in the outdoor lighting that activated as he approached. Figured I'd find you here, Nash said, his voice rough with emotion that was difficult to categorize. Drinking alone in the dark like some noir detective. David didn't stand, didn't invite him to sit. He simply raised his glass slightly. Nash, surprised to see you. Believe me, I'm surprised to be here. Nash hesitated, then moved to the railing, keeping distance between them. That was quite a performance today. Not a performance, just the truth. Nash laughed, a short, humorless sound. Truth. Everyone claims to want it until they actually hear it. He stared out into the darkness. You humiliated my daughter. Your daughter humiliated herself. David replied evenly. I just made it public, and that makes you better? Airing dirty laundry at a wedding. David considered this, taking another sip of his whiskey. Not better, just done pretending. They stood in silence for a long moment, the sounds of the forest at night, a gentle backdrop to the tension between them. Josephine is staying with her mother, Nash finally said. She's not in good shape. I'm sorry to hear that, David replied, and found that he meant it. Despite everything, he took no pleasure in Josephine's pain. But she made her choices. As did you, Nash pointed out. You could have handled this privately, like the Larkspurs handle everything. David set down his glass and finally stood, facing his father-in-law directly, behind closed doors, maintaining the appearance of perfection while rot spreads underneath. No thanks. Nash's jaw tightened, but surprisingly, he didn't argue. You know, I never understood what she saw in you. Neither did I, David admitted. Maybe we were both pretending to see something that wasn't there. Another long silence fell between them, less hostile now, more contemplative. I disowned her, Nash said finally, his voice quieter, after we left the venue. Told her she wasn't welcome in our home until she got her life straight. David hadn't expected this. He studied Nash's face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only weary resignation. That seems harsh, he said carefully. She's still your daughter. Yes, which is why I expect better from her. Nash's posture straightened, some of his usual authority returning. The Larkspurs may focus on appearances, David, but we also believe in accountability. Josephine betrayed not just you, but everything we raised her to be. I'm not sure that's entirely fair, David found himself saying, surprised by his own desire to defend Josephine despite everything. We all played our parts in this mess. Nash turned to him fully now, his expression shifting into something like reluctant respect. That's surprisingly generous of you. David shrugged. Not generous. Honest. I didn't speak up when I should have. I enabled the situation by playing along. Still, Nash said, what she did was wrong. And for what it's worth, I respect how you handled yourself today. Not the public spectacle that was tactless, but the dignity with which you delivered it. Coming from Nash Larkspur, this was tantamount to effusive praise. David nodded, accepting it for what it was. What happens now? Nash asked. Now, David gazed up at the stars again. Now I rebuild, without pretense. Good luck with that, Nash said, and it didn't sound sarcastic. He turned to leave, then paused. Taryn asked me to tell you that she doesn't blame you. She's angry, but not at you. Thank you for telling me, David replied. Please give her my regrets about disrupting her day. Nash nodded once, sharply, then walked back toward his car. Before he reached it, he called back over his shoulder, for what it's worth, you would have made a good Larkspur in another life. David smiled to himself as the car pulled away. Coming from Nash, that was as close to an apology as he was likely to get. Alone again, David picked up his phone and scrolled through the notifications. Messages from colleagues who had attended the wedding, expressing shock or support. Several missed calls from Josephine. A text from Taryn. We need to talk, but not today. Take care of yourself, David. And a simple message from Greer. Finally. Coffee sometime. David responded to that one, yes. I'd like that. He finished his whiskey and went inside to the home that would soon be just his. Tomorrow, there would be consequences to face, arrangements to make, a new life to begin constructing. But tonight, he would sleep without deception between him and his dreams that IT was enough. It was everything. 3 days after Taryn's wedding, the video appeared online. Someone David never discovered who had recorded his speech and the subsequent revelations on their phone. The clip, edited to include the most dramatic moments and titled ATM No More, spread first through local social media circles, then wider as it was picked up by content aggregators fascinated by the public unraveling of an influencer's carefully curated image. David discovered it while having breakfast, his phone suddenly exploding with notifications from people he hadn't spoken to in years. He watched it once, wincing at seeing himself so exposed, then put the phone away. That same morning, he received an email from Josephine's lawyer, her first official communication since the wedding. The message was terse, threatening, full of demands. David forwarded it to his own attorney, without reading beyond the first paragraph. What surprised him most about the aftermath was how quickly Josephine's carefully built influencer empire began to crumble. Within a week, 3 major sponsors had quietly dropped her. Her engagement metrics plummeted as followers either abandoned her or stayed only for the drama. The narrative she had controlled for so long was now beyond her grasp. David didn't follow the collapse closely. He had his own life to rebuild. But reports reached him through mutual acquaintances, each update confirming what he had always suspected. The image Josephine had projected was as fragile as it was false. 16 days after the wedding, Taryn finally called. "David," she said when he answered, her voice tentative. "Is this a good time?" "It is," he replied, stepping away from his home office desk where he'd been working. "How are you, Taryn?" "Honestly, still processing." She sighed heavily. "The honeymoon was complicated." "I'm sorry for that," David said sincerely. "You deserved better." "Did I, though?" There was a bitter edge to her laugh. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About facades. The Larkspurs are pretty good at those, aren't we?" David moved to his back deck, settling into a chair. "We all have our performances, Taryn." "Maybe. But Joe took it to another level." A pause. "Dad told you he disowned her?" "He did." "I was surprised." "Don't be. Dad values control above all else." Joe went off script in the worst possible way. Taryn's voice softened. "She's staying with a friend in Charlotte." Not Paxton that imploded immediately. Turns out he was just using her too. David absorbed this, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and pity. "And how are you and Bo handling everything?" "Better than expected. Actually, once the initial shock wore off, Bo said something that really helped. He said, 'At least we're starting our marriage with all the cards on the table.'" Taryn's voice brightened slightly. "And you know what? He's right. No facades between us." "That's surprisingly wise," David acknowledged. "Bo's full of surprises." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Look, I didn't call to chat about my marriage. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" David hadn't expected this. "For what?" "For the truth. It hurt God. It hurt, but it was necessary. Joe was living a lie, and we were all enabling it." She took a deep breath. "And for the wedding. We got the financial records from Dad. You really did pay for most of it." "I wanted to," David said simply. "Why? After everything Joe put you through?" David considered the question, watching a pair of cardinals flit between trees at the edge of his property. "Because I still believed in love, even if it wasn't mine. What you and Bo have is real, Taryn. It deserved to be celebrated properly." Silence hung between them for a moment before Taryn spoke again, her voice thick with emotion. "I wish things had been different. You deserve better too, David." "I'm getting better now," he assured her. "Day by day." "Are we?" Taryn hesitated. "Are we still family in some way?" The question caught David off guard. "Do you want to be?" "I think I do," she admitted. "You're the most honest person I know, even if your methods are a bit dramatic." David laughed, feeling something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "I like that, Taryn. Family without the facade." "Deal." She sounded relieved. "Bo would like to have you over for dinner sometime, when you're ready." "I'd like that too," David said, and was surprised to find he meant it. After they hung up, David sat for a long time on his deck, watching the birds and thinking about family, the one he'd lost and the one he might still have in some reconfigured form. That evening, as he was preparing dinner, his doorbell rang. David approached cautiously, checking the security camera first. Greer Wilson stood on his porch, looking slightly nervous but determined. David opened the door, genuinely pleased to see her. "I know we said coffee," Greer said by way of greeting, "but I was in the neighborhood and thought, well, this is probably inappropriate, showing up unannounced." "Not at all," David replied, stepping back to invite her in. "I'm just making dinner. Nothing fancy, but there's plenty if you'd like to join me." Greer hesitated, then nodded. "Actually, that sounds nice." As they moved to the kitchen, Greer glanced around, taking the changes David had already made to the space books no longer arranged by color. Furniture rearranged for comfort rather than Instagram aesthetics. Personal photos that had been deemed not on brand now displayed prominently. "You've reclaimed the place," she observed. "Working on it," David agreed, returning to chopping vegetables. "It's a process." Greer leaned against the counter, watching him. "You know you're something of a local legend now, right?" "The video," David grimaced. "Not exactly how I wanted to be remembered. If it helps, most people are on your side, especially those who knew Josephine well." Greer accepted the glass of wine he offered. "I try to warn you, you know. At your rehearsal dinner." "I remember," David said, adding the vegetables to a pan. "I wasn't ready to hear it then. And now." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. Now I'm ready for honesty in all its forms. Greer nodded, raising her glass slightly. To honesty, then, however uncomfortable. They clinked glasses, and as they shared a simple meal, David found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. There was nothing flirtatious about the evening, just two people connecting authentically without agenda or performance that IT felt, he realized, like the first step towards something new. Something real. 1 year after the wedding that ended his marriage, David stood in a classroom at Asheville Technical Community College, surrounded by a dozen teenagers hunched over laptops. The atmosphere was focused but relaxed, filled with the quiet clicking of keyboards and occasional questions or exclamations. Mr. Cruz, a girl with purple hair and multiple ear piercings, called out, "I think I found another vulnerability in the test system." David moved to her workstation, examining her screen with practiced attention. "Good catch, Zoe. What tipped you off?" As she walked him through her reasoning, keen observations about potential security flaws in the simulated network, David felt a familiar sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with his own accomplishments and everything to do with watching someone else discover their capabilities. This was his life now. 3 days a week, he taught ethical hacking and cybersecurity fundamentals to high school students as part of a program he'd helped establish with funds originally set aside for Josephine's planned kitchen renovation. "All right, everyone," he called out as the session neared its end. "Remember, your final projects are due next week. Your task is to secure the mock system against all the attack vectors we've discussed. Extra credit for finding vulnerabilities I haven't mentioned." As the students packed up, chatting excitedly about their discoveries, Harlan appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure drawing curious glances from the teens. "Still turning kids into hackers, I see," Harlan commented as the room emptied. "Ethical hackers," David corrected with a smile. "Future cybersecurity professionals." Harlan grunted, but his expression was approving as he helped David gather the equipment. "Got plans tonight? Some of the guys from the veterans group are getting together at Murphy's." "Thanks, but I've got a dinner thing," David replied, shutting down his laptop. "Rain check. This dinner thing," Harlan said carefully, "would have happened to involve a certain elementary school teacher who's been just friend with you for months now." David shot him a warning look, but couldn't entirely suppress his smile. "Greer and I are taking things slow. Very slow. Glacial," Harlan agreed. "But I get it. After Josephine, it's not just that," David explained as they walked out to the parking lot. "I'm enjoying building something based on friendship first. No rush, no pressure, no performance." "Speaking of Josephine," Harlan said, his tone shifting, "heard anything recently?" David shook his head. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. Surprisingly straightforward once Josephine's lawyer realized how meticulously David had documented everything. "Not directly. Tara mentioned she's moved to Atlanta, trying to rebuild her brand with a redemption narrative." "Classic," Harlan scoffed. "Turn the villain into the victim." "It doesn't matter," David said, and meant it. "Her story isn't mine anymore." They reached their vehicles, Harlan's rumbling motorcycle and David's modest SUV that had replaced the luxury model Josephine had insisted upon. "You're looking good, brother," Harlan observed. "Settled. Like you found your footing." David considered this as he unlocked his car. It was true. The past year had been challenging, rebuilding his life, establishing new routines, learning to trust his own instincts again. But it had also been profoundly liberating. "I found my voice," he corrected. The rest followed. After saying goodbye to Harlan, David drove to the small foundation office he'd established downtown. The Asheville Digital Equity Project, funded largely by the money he'd saved by simplifying his lifestyle, focused on bringing technology education to underserved communities in Western North Carolina. He spent 2 hours reviewing grant applications and coordinating with partners before heading to the coffee shop where he was meeting Greer. As he walked in, he spotted her already seated by the window, grading papers with focused attention, her auburn hair falling forward around her face. The sight stirred something in him, not the desperate infatuation he'd once felt for Josephine, but something quieter, more substantial. Friendship deepening, possibility unfolding without rush. Sorry I'm late, he said as he joined her. Grant's season. Greer looked up, her smile warm and genuine. No problem. I'm just finishing these vocabulary tests. She set aside her red pen. How were the future hackers today? Impressive, David replied, settling across from her. Zoe especially. I'm trying to convince her to apply for that summer program at NC State. They fell into easy conversation about their day, their work, books they'd read recently. There was no posturing, no hidden agenda, no need to impress or perform. Just two people present with each other. When Greer reached across the table to emphasize a point, her hand briefly touched his. Neither of them pulled away immediately. David, she said, her tone shifting slightly, I've been meaning to ask you something. He met her gaze, open to whatever was coming. Are we dating? The directness of the question was pure Greer, straightforward, unembellished. Because it feels like we might be, but we've never actually said it. David considered the question, giving it the thoughtfulness it deserved. Would you like to be? I asked first, she challenged, but her eyes were smiling. Fair enough. He turned his hand to properly hold hers. Yes, I think we are. Slowly, carefully, but yes. Relief and pleasure spread across her face. Good. That's good. I just wanted to be clear. Clarity is important, David agreed, squeezing her hand gently. No more reading between lines for me. As they continued their conversation, now with this new understanding between them, David felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was how relationships should develop, with honesty, with mutual respect, with genuine connection. Later, as they walked through downtown Asheville, the early evening air crisp with approaching autumn, Greer asked, Any regrets? About how everything happened with Josephine. David thought about it as they passed storefronts and restaurants, street musicians playing in the gathering dusk. About the marriage? Many. About how it ended? He shook his head. No, it needed to end, and nothing less dramatic would have broken the pattern. The video still surfaces occasionally, Greer noted. Someone shared it in a teacher's group chat last month with the caption, When the quiet ones finally speak up. David winced. Not exactly the legacy I'd choose. Maybe not, Greer agreed, but it's honest. And from what I've seen this past year, that matters more to you than being liked. It does, he acknowledged, though being liked by the right people is still pretty nice. She bumped her shoulder against his playfully. Smooth cruise. Very smooth. As they walked on, David reflected on the journey of the past year, from the hollow performance of his marriage to this genuine connection, from enabling deception to building a life founded on truth. It hadn't been easy, and there had been painful moments of doubt and loneliness. But standing here now, beside a woman who saw him clearly and valued what she saw, he knew he wouldn't trade this hard-won peace for any carefully curated illusion. He was, at last, exactly where he needed to be. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, nearly 18 months after the wedding. David almost missed it among the usual business correspondence, but the subject line caught his attention. Request from Jay. His finger hovered over the delete button, tempted to consign it to digital oblivion without reading. But curiosity won out. David, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm back in Asheville for a week and would appreciate the chance to talk. Not to fix anything we're beyond that, but for closure. Just coffee, in public, .josephinep.s. The therapist I've been seeing for the past year suggests this would be beneficial for both of us. Your choice, of course. David stared at the screen, surprised most by his own lack of visceral reaction. No anger surged through him, no bitterness rose to the surface. Just a mild curiosity and a distant echo of what had once been love. He showed the email to Greer that evening as they cooked dinner together in his kitchen, now their kitchen, since she had moved in 3 months ago. Are you going to meet her? Greer asked, her tone neutral as she chopped herbs. David leaned against the counter, considering. I'm not sure. What do you think? I think, Greer said carefully, that you don't need closure from her. You've already moved on. She looked up, her expression open. But maybe she needs it from you. Maybe, David agreed. Though that's not really my responsibility anymore. No, it's not. Greer scraped the herbs into a bowl. But you've always had a generous spirit, David. It's one of the things I love about you. The word hung between them, not for the first time, but still fresh enough to create a moment of shared recognition. David moved to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love you too," he murmured. "And your wisdom." "Not wisdom," she corrected. "Just the benefit of watching from the outside all these years. You were always better than she deserved." David turned her to face him. "Let's not do that. I played my part in the dysfunction too." Greer nodded, accepting the correction. "Fair enough. So, will you meet her?" After a moment's consideration, David reached for his phone and typed a brief reply. "Thursday, 2 p.m., Harvest Coffee downtown. Half hour." The response came almost immediately. "Thank you. See you then." When Thursday arrived, David found himself strangely calm as he walked to the coffee shop. He'd chosen the location, deliberately a busy place where many people knew him through his foundation work. Far removed from anywhere he and Josephine had frequented together, he arrived 10 minutes early, selected a table with good visibility of both the entrance and exit, and ordered a simple black coffee. Old security habits died hard. Precisely at 2, Josephine walked in. David's first thought was that she looked different. Not dramatically, so she was still beautiful, still put together with fashionable clothes and perfect makeup. But there was less artifice somehow, her hair in a simpler style, her outfit elegant, but not ostentatious. She spotted him immediately, hesitated briefly, then approached with purpose. David stood, not out of any lingering affection, but from ingrained courtesy. "David," she said, her voice carrying a nervous edge he'd rarely heard from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Josephine," he replied with a small nod. "You're looking well." She gave a half-smile. "May I?" She gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please." They sat in awkward silence until Josephine went to order her coffee. When she returned, David noticed she'd chosen a simple latte rather than her previously customary complex, modified specialty drinks that had often made baristas roll their eyes. "So," David said once she was settled. "Therapy." Josephine nodded, cradling her cup. "For a year now. Twice weekly at first, now once. It was necessary." "I'm glad you got help," he said, and meant it. "After everything fell apart, my marriage, my relationship with my family, my career, I didn't have much choice." She took a sip of coffee, her eyes briefly closing. "I hit bottom hard, David. Moved in with my cousin in Atlanta. Started over as a social media coordinator for a small company. Very small. Taryn mentioned you were in Atlanta," David acknowledged. "She said you were rebuilding. We talk occasionally," Josephine confirmed. "It's strained, but better than nothing. Dad still won't speak to me." "Nash holds grudges," David observed. A family trait, apparently. She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Not that I blame him." "Were you?" David studied her, looking for signs of the manipulation he'd grown so accustomed to detecting, but found none. Just a woman who seemed tired, humbled, perhaps genuinely changed. "Why did you want to meet, Josephine?" he asked directly. Closure is a nebulous concept. She met his gaze and, for once, didn't look away or deflect. "I wanted to apologize. Not to fix anything or get anything from you, just to acknowledge the harm I caused. My therapist calls it making amends where possible." David nodded slowly. "I'm listening." Josephine set down her cup, her hands now clasped tightly in her lap. "I was cruel to you, David. Dismissive, manipulative, unfaithful. I used you for financial security while mocking the work that provided it. I cheated on you not just physically, but emotionally. I betrayed your trust in countless ways." Her voice remained steady, though her knuckles were white. "I'm deeply sorry for all of it." The words hung between them, simple but weighty. David let them settle, taking his time to formulate a response. "Thank you," he said finally. "I appreciate that, and I accept your apology." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. That means a lot." She hesitated, then added, "I want you to know I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just acknowledgement." "Good," David replied candidly. "Because while I accept your apology, forgiveness isn't something I'm able to offer." She nodded, unsurprised. "I understand." "Do you?" he asked, not unkindly. "Because the David you knew would have forgiven you immediately, would have smoothed things over, would have abandoned his own boundaries to maintain peace. But that's not who you really are, Josephine said softly. I see that now. I never really knew you, did I? I was too focused on what you could do for me to see who you actually were. The insight surprised him. That's perceptive. Therapy, she said with a faint smile. Expensive, but effective. She glanced around the coffee shop. I hear you're doing well. The foundation, teaching. Someone mentioned you're seeing Greer Wilson. I am, David confirmed, not elaborating. His relationship with Greer was private, not for Josephine's consumption. Josephine seemed to understand his reticence. She always was the most genuine of my friends. I'm glad. They sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the coffee shop filling the space between them. David checked his watch. 20 minutes had passed. I should go soon, he said. I have a meeting at 3. Josephine nodded quickly. Of course. I just have one more thing to say, if that's all right. Go ahead. She took a deep breath. What you did at Taryn's wedding was public and humiliating, but it was also necessary. I would never have faced myself otherwise. So while I wish it had happened differently, I can't honestly say I wish it hadn't happened. David hadn't expected this perspective. That's mature of you to recognize. I'm trying, she said with a shrug. Day by day, she stood, gathering her purse. Thank you for meeting me, David. For what it's worth, I hope you're happy now. You deserve that. As she turned to leave, David found himself asking, and you? Are you building something real now? Josephine paused, considering the question seriously. I'm building something honest. Whether it becomes something meaningful remains to be seen. She offered a final small smile. Goodbye, David. Goodbye, Josephine. David watched her walk away, out of the coffee shop, and, finally, out of his life in any meaningful sense. The encounter had been neither as difficult nor as cathartic as he might have imagined. Just a conversation between two people who had once been central to each other's lives and now were simply not. Later that day, as the community gathered for the annual Asheville Technology Innovation Awards, David found himself on stage, accepting a plaque for community impact through technology. The recognition for the foundation's work bringing coding education to rural schools was unexpected but gratifying. As he looked out at the audience, he spotted Greer in the front row, her proud smile warming him more than any applause. Beside her sat Harlan, looking uncomfortable in a sports jacket but beaming nonetheless. Even Taryn and Bo had come, sitting a few rows back, their support a testament to connections that had survived despite everything. Thank you for this honor, David began, adjusting the microphone. When I started the Asheville Digital Equity Project, it was born from a personal realization that had nothing to do with technology. He paused, looking down at the plaque in his hands. Sometimes rock bottom is the best foundation. Just make sure you're not carrying deadweight when you build back up. The words resonated through the room, drawing murmurs of appreciation and understanding. As David continued his brief remarks, expressing gratitude to partners and participants, he felt the full circle of his journey from the man who had allowed himself to be diminished to someone who now stood firmly in his own truth. Later, walking home with Greer hand in hand, they passed the barn-style resort where Taryn's wedding had taken place. It was hosting a youth tech camp that weekend, one sponsored partly by David's foundation. Full circle, Greer observed, following his gaze to the venue. In the best way, David agreed, squeezing her hand. The past would always be there, the pain, the lessons, the moments of both weakness and strength. But it no longer defined him or limited him. What mattered now was the path ahead, built on a foundation of hard-won honesty and genuine connection. As they walked on through the twilight, David felt neither triumph nor lingering resentment, just gratitude for the journey that had brought him here to this moment, this woman, this life that was authentically, imperfectly his own.